Ready?
We're live.
Great, thank you. Good evening and welcome to this planning retreat of the Boston School Committee. I'm Chairperson Jerry Robinson and we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Because this is a remote meeting, I will ask Ms. Sullivan to please call the roll.
Thank you. Dr. Coleman? He'll be joining us in a few moments. Mr. De Araujo? He'll also be joining us in a few moments. Ms. Lopera?
Present.
Ms. Mercer?
Present.
Ms. Polanco Garcia?
Present.
Mr. Tran?
Present.
Mr. O'Neill? I believe will be joining us shortly. And Ms. Robinson?
Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Tonight's session is being shared live on Zoom. It will be rebroadcast on Boston City TV and posted on the school committee webpage and on YouTube. For those of you joining us on Zoom or at a later date, you can find tonight's agenda and translations posted on the committee's webpage, bostonpublicschools.org/school committee under the October 12th link. The committee is pleased to be offering live simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cabo Verdeano, Cantonese, Mandarin, and Vietnamese. After the interpreters finish introducing themselves and providing Zoom instructions, we'll activate the interpretation icon, the globe at the bottom of your screen. Click the icon to select your language preference. Will our Spanish interpreters please introduce yourselves and give Zoom instructions in Espanol?
Good evening. My name is Luz Barreto, and I will be interpreting in Spanish with Randolph and Miguel. Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Luz Barreto y estaré interpretando en español con Randolph y Miguel. Para oír la interpretación simultánea, por favor busque el icono del globo mundial en la parte inferior de la pantalla y seleccione el español. Si está usando su celular, entre al Zoom, busque 3 puntos en la parte superior derecha, los toca y verá la palabra interpretación. Seleccione el español para oír la presentación. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Will our Haitian
Hello.
Creole? Oh, okay, there you are. Thank you. Wasn't sure.
Hello.
Thanks, Randall.
Hi, good evening, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone, everybody in the meeting. Muy buenas noches, damas y caballeros. Mi nombre es Randolph Domínguez. Voy a ser su intérprete simultáneo. Voy a estar trabajando en la área simultánea junto con mi colega Miguel. Muchas gracias. Buenas noches.
Do we have a third Spanish interpreter?
Miguel.
Okay. Go ahead, Miguel.
Hola, mi nombre es Miguel Pérez, voy a estar traduciendo para esta audición. Cuando ellos empiezan la traducción, vas a ver abajo salir unos botones y vas a cambiar el botón que dice español, así va a estar en el canal de español escuchando todo traducido. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Miguel
Thank
Pérez,
you.
interpreter for this evening.
Thank you. Will our Haitian Creole interpreters please introduce yourselves and give Zoom instructions in Haitian Creole?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sergio Saint-Hilaire, Haitian Creole interpreter. Nous très contents pour nous avoir après-midi, moi-même avec Nadège, on a assuré ce service-là pour vous. Et que nous faut connaître que tout ça rien pour dire ou à dire, et puis n'a traduit pour vous. Et si vous avez une question pour poser, ou après aller dans le screen, ou après regarder en bas screen, là, ou après joindre un globe, ou après cliquer là-dedans, et ou après entrer dans la conversation. Nous souhaitons pour passer un très bon après-midi, bonne écoute. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello everyone. Good evening. Bonsoir, non, moi c'est Nadège, moi c'est un créole interprète. Moi vraiment content pour moi là avec nous à soin. C'est moi-même avec Sergio qui a interprété pour nous. Moi j'ai commencé à interpréter à 6h30 et m'a fini à 8h30. Et de là, Sergio a continué restreignant. J'espère que nous va porter un bon travail pour même à soin. Et si vous avez une question, pas oublier de taper dans le chat là. Merci et bonne écoute.
Thank you. Will our Cabo Verdeano interpreters please introduce yourselves and give instructions, Zoom instructions in Cabo Verdeano?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Josiane, Cape Verdean interpreter. Boa tarde, meu nome é Josiane, intérprete simultâneo PES no TILI. Para nós termos acesso à interpretação simultânea, nós clicamos no ícone de globo na parte inferior do nosso ecrã, logo que fica disponível. Se nós temos no telemóvel, nós clicamos no 3 pontinhos. Obrigada. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Madam Chair. My name is Armando Monteiro. I'm going to be your Cape Verdean interpreter. Boa noite a tudo alguém. Meu nome é Armando Monteiro, servo intérprete de crioulo. Obrigado. Thank you.
Thank you. Will our Cantonese interpreters please introduce yourselves and give Zoom instructions in Cantonese?
Thank you, Madam Chair. 大家好，我係 Anna， 我係你哋嘅今晚個廣東話同步翻譯。今天晚上我同 Mabel 咧將會搭檔咧為大家係提供呢個廣東話同步翻譯嘅。一陣間見到個地球儀嘅時候咧，請你撳落去揀 Cantonese， 咁你就會成功進入咗廣東話翻譯頻道噶啦。如果你用手機嘅話咧，咁你撳個3個點，咁亦都會成功進入咗廣東話翻譯頻道噶啦。唔該晒大家 ，Thank you。Go ahead, Mabel。
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Madam Chair. 大家好，我係今晚嘅另外一位廣東話嘅翻譯，我會同 Anna 一齊提供同步嘅廣東話翻譯。咁我哋每半個鐘換一次，由 Anna 開始先嘅。咁大家啱會見到下邊嘅地球儀標誌咧，點入去揀 Cantonese。如果你用手機上網咧，你點下邊嘅3個點，更多選語言嘅選擇功能，亦都係揀 Cantonese 嘅頻道。咁一陣間見啦。Thank you.
Thank you. Will our Mandarin interpreters please introduce yourselves and give Zoom instructions in Mandarin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, everyone. My name is Wei. Tina and I will be your Chinese Mandarin interpreters for the meeting tonight. 大家晚上好，我和 Tina 是您今天晚上普通话的同声传译。感谢您今天加入这个会议。如果您需要同声传译的话呢，请你点击屏幕底部的地球仪标记，然后选择中文。Mandarin 选项进入翻译频道听我们的同声传译。如果您使用手机或者是平板电脑，请点击3个点，然后选择更多，然后进入这个翻译频道。OK, Tina.
Thank you. Hello, this is Tina Wang. I will be a partner for the Mandarin with Wei. 大家好，我是您今天晚上和伟一起做同传翻译的。那么请一会儿选项选这个普通话，一会儿见。祝您今晚愉快了。Thank you.
Thank you. Will our Vietnamese interpreters please introduce yourselves and give Zoom instructions in Vietnamese?
Good evening. My name is Duyên, Vietnamese interpreter. Xin chào quý vị. Nếu anh chị cần tiếng Việt thì xin bấm vào quả cầu và chúng tôi sẽ cung cấp thông dịch liên tục cho các anh chị. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Vi. I will be your Vietnamese interpreter for tonight's meeting. Kính chào quý vị. Tôi và chị Duyên sẽ là thông dịch viên của quý vị buổi tối ngày hôm nay. Xin quý vị nhìn vào màn hình và bấm vào quả cầu để tìm tiếng Việt để chúng tôi có thể cung cấp thông dịch cho quý vị nhiều. Cảm ơn nhiều. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you all for assisting us this evening. We regret that we were unable to secure American Sign Language interpretation for this session. We will turn on the closed caption features. Thank you to all the BPS staff behind the scenes who also provide support for our virtual meetings to run smoothly. We will now activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. I'd like to remind everyone to speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. Thank you to everyone who signed up for public comment. Sign up for public comment closed today at 5:30 p.m. Please make sure you are signed into Zoom under the same name you used to sign up for public comment. You can use the Zoom tools to rename yourself so that committee staff will be able to recognize you when it comes time to call on you. Thank you for your cooperation. For today's retreat only, the public comment period will be limited to 20 minutes, and we encourage speakers to focus their remarks on the topics listed on today's planning agenda. School committee roles and responsibilities, priority topics and agenda setting for the 21-22 school year, and meeting structure. Before we dive in, I'd like to invite Superintendent Katselias to give us opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for having this retreat. I think it is a real testament to your leadership to be organized as a school committee, to set the calendar and the agenda, to look at our working task forces and committees and being able to really forecast for the team and for the public where we're headed as a body. And that gives us time also to plan our team, to anticipate all of the reports and the necessary public engagement that needs to happen on a multitude of items, whether it's policy items or standing reports or standing work of the district and the governance. And so very appreciative of your leadership in getting this meeting together and convening us in order to get ourselves organized for the next school year and the school year calendar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent. So I'd like to begin this evening with a brief overview of school committee roles and responsibilities. The school committee is charged with 4 major responsibilities: defining the vision, mission, and goals of the Boston Public Schools, establishing and monitoring the annual operating budget, hiring, managing, and annually evaluating the superintendent, and setting and reviewing district policies and practices to support student achievement. The committee was fortunate to receive professional development training from the Mass Association of School Committees in September. The training focused on ethics, open meeting law, and roles and responsibilities, and particularly the separation of powers between the committee and the superintendent. I'd like to take a moment to invite members to share their reflections from that training. Just please raise your hand in Zoom and I can call on you. Mr. DeArujo, welcome. Yes.
Thank you. And my apologies for being on and off camera as I have a home babysitting situation. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Superintendent, for this retreat, something I've been very much looking forward to and hope to participate in the next few hours. As one of the newer members, I very much appreciated the session that we had a few weeks ago. All the issues that Madam Chair, you listed, and in particular, understanding our role, understanding our role really as an institution, how we can act as a committee to improve, to improve education for children across the city of Boston, and also seeing both what our responsibilities are and what our authority is, and that was really came home to me that. Not only, Madam Chair, you mentioned the separation of powers, so to speak, with respect to our role vis-a-vis the superintendent, but also with respect to our role vis-a-vis the city council, vis-a-vis the mayor, that we are, in our democratic system, creating these separation of powers, putting functions into different bodies so that they can compete and balance. Obviously, we all want to collaborate, but also balance off each other so that there is not a concentration of power, so that you have individuals who are acting according to a specific mission for their institution. And that's where I hope a big part of what we're doing here tonight and going forward is understanding what our role is as an institution, how we act as a body, how we understand ourselves relative to the other bodies that impact the care and education of our kids, whether it be the city council. We learned, of course, that we are the legislative body around school issues, whether it be in respect to the mayor's office. We have our role in the budget, but we're also appointed by a mayor. So yeah, so just wanted to just put that out there, that I hope, if anything, I hope is for myself, and also love to hear from my colleagues, to have that that identity, that we each have an identity as a school committee member and as a school committee, as to, hey, this is what we do, this is what we're responsible for. So thank you.
Thank you. Others? Any other reflections? Okay. Okay, we'll move forward with the agenda. Thank you, Mr. De Arusha, for your comments. We'll move forward with the
Ms.
agenda, but-
Robinson, I think Mr. O'Neill has his hand up.
I can't even see Mr. O'Neill.
Sorry.
There you are, You're on the other screen. Thank you.
I'll help you find them.
You didn't, I think you have to, if you put yours, with all the faces, if you put your virtual hand up, your picture pops over.
You're
So,
right.
yeah,
Sorry,
I'm
Madam
sorry,
Chair.
it's okay. I didn't
I
see
will
your
do that
hand,
going
sorry.
forward instead of just
All righty,
raising my
thank
hand.
you.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
I think it was an excellent session with the Mass Association of School Committees, and I appreciate the Executive Director, Glenn Kocha, spending several hours with us. It is always worthwhile and helpful for all of us to get training on Mass open meeting law, on ethics, on conflict of interest, but also his thoughts about the roles and responsibilities of school committees in Massachusetts, and how our statute sets up our specific requirements, and where we are different from several other school committees in the Commonwealth, as far as what we delegate to the superintendent, for example, collective bargaining, and some other examples he gave. So I thought that was very helpful. I look forward to tonight's conversation. We are an evolving committee with 2 new members, and appreciate that they were both able to join. It was also great that both of our student representatives, Ms. Mercer and her backup, Ms. Lowe, were able to join as well. And I believe that was helpful. I also, I have some other comments as well, but I'm going to hold them for later on as we get into this conversation. But I look forward to tonight's conversation. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Yes, I agree. I was really glad that, we have not been together in person for the last 20 months almost, and having new members that we had never even had a chance to meet in person. So it was great to be able to actually see in person our members and to see one another. And I'm happy that we're all together tonight, even if it happens to be virtually. I've never done a virtual retreat like this before, so I am hoping that we can all work together to make it work and to continue to build on the learning that we started a couple of weeks ago. With that, Ms. Costello, do you want to put up the screen so that we can begin to walk through our agenda? Great. So one of the things that I have wondered about throughout my years as a school committee member, now as your chair, is how we put together the annual calendar of meeting agendas. Sometimes I think things would come as a surprise. I wasn't always clear about why something was coming before us at that time. And what I thought that we should do is to take a look at our year and to understand what comes before us, what needs to come before us in terms of policy votes, et cetera, or updates around particular topics, so that we can anticipate what we will be looking at. And also we can look to see if there are things that we would like to have updates or need to learn more about that haven't been scheduled. So tonight, we're not going to try to finalize the whole calendar. I think both Liz and Ms. Sullivan and Ms. Costello will be going after we have completed our task tonight to come back with a draft of the full year calendar at our next meeting or so. But felt tonight would be an opportunity for us to review together what is required, and then to look at our own suggestions and to try to get a proposed 3-month schedule, at least to get us to the end of this year, and then continuing to move forward with a skeletal schedule for the rest of the year. So I'm going to try to see you all. It's hard to see. I'm going to have her put down the agenda so that we can see one another and talk, and we'll go at it from there. So anyway, so Megan, do you want to begin with talking about the required agenda items? Yeah.
Can you see and hear me?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to walk us through a couple of slides here that I think will help frame our discussion for the rest of the next hour or so. So we have some items here that are required presentations or presentations that we regularly give on an annual basis or on a quarterly basis. So you'll see here a variety of topics, including some budget updates and financial updates, MSBA, statements of interest, SPEDPAC, annual report, opportunity and achievement gaps, annual task force update, school quality working group update, ELL task force update, BSAC annual update, exam schools, admissions policy update, and we're doing that in June, but we've discussed doing it a few times this year. The wellness report, the superintendent's evaluation, the Massachusetts School Choice Program hearing and vote, MassCore, which will be quarterly, and then the preliminary budget recommendations, which happens in February, and then the final budget vote, which happens in March. And then we've also discussed regular ESSER updates and an update on the student information sharing group. So these are some of the reoccurring agenda items. Madam Chair, would you like me to go to the next slide to discuss some of the priorities, or do we want to pause here and have a conversation?
Sorry. I wanted to give members a moment if anybody needed any clarification on any of these recurring agenda items before we move forward. And just go ahead and speak out if you do. Yes.
Madam Chair, one of the things that's not here, and I'm not sure where it is, but I know that one of the wonderful things that Member O'Neill has done for us was create the audit committee. And I don't know whether that's baked into our bread yet. So as we think about standing committees or task force that are central to the work, that auditing function, I don't know whether they're set up, it's relatively new, so I'm not surprised it's on our schedule. But that's one thing that I see off my limited brain cells that I don't see on this list that may be useful.
Okay, thank you.
We could maybe discuss that where the standing committees are in the task forces, Madam Chair. And I think it's in the presentation a little later.
Yes. Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Yes, thank you.
Dr. Coleman is talking about, and I do also see missing the hiring one that we typically do in.
Okay.
And Madam Chair.
Yes.
And can I ask, so this is the universe of, I guess, listing items, recurring items. What about, I don't know if I'm missing here, but just the basic school start and end time calendar that, maybe I am missing that, but that, leading into, we know what we're going to be talking about in the summer, leading up to September. We know end of school year, we'll be talking about summer, kind of those key marks like enrollment, like all those different kind of milestones or benchmarks throughout the year. Is that contemplated in this as well? Or actually, I think it should be contemplated. I know it comes up, but or something for the
Right.
superintendent report or.
Yeah, I was going to, excuse me, go ahead, Superintendent.
Last year I did it in the superintendent report. I reported out on the calendar and presented that. But I could do it more formally in a report. It usually is around, I think, February in Boston that we do that. January, February, we start putting that out because parents need to make their summer plans and be ready for the fall.
Yeah, I just think in general with those milestones, just if I appreciate that, Superintendent, if there's, especially if we see data on issues that kind of have its own, we know we're going to see, whatever data for, leading up to enrollment, whatever data for, summer programming, because sometimes in the superintendent's report we get, when we get, the information with a lot of data and background, and I want to make sure that we kind of, if we can break that out, so we can, and this is probably a discussion for a little bit later on kind of the timing and so forth. But when we're being asked to review data, metrics and so forth, that we have that built out so we know every September we're going to be focused on this, every October and so forth. I know I'm speaking kind of a little bit in generalities there, but I just kind of feel like the school calendar itself produces milestones that we should be ready every year to evaluate.
And I think probably with that, Mr. DeRujo would be the MCAS standing report as well that we give.
Okay.
And that maybe a broader accountability, and then also report on MCAS, transformation schools, our DESE MOU, that kind of thing could be reported on.
Okay. That's great. Mr. Tran?
Oh, thank you. I don't know whether, well, first of all, I'm sorry for not having been able to attend the training or whatever that was a couple of weeks ago due to my own situation. Looking at the recurring agenda items, I personally think that personnel, well, maybe I'm repeating what Dr. Casillas just mentioned, but I do believe that we need to have information regarding hiring, firing, retirement, particularly in relation to the diversity of the workforce. In another word, I like to see information on the workforce analysis every time that we can get in relation to diversity. And I like to see information on hiring of other type of needs beyond what we are so-called protected categories, such as veterans, things of that nature. People from other spatial categories. The state is doing all that very well, and most other workforce are doing all that, and I like to see that here as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. O'Neill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, Mr. Tran, nice to see you again. I'm glad you're health issues have passed, and glad you're back with us. So welcome.
It's still recurring, not
not recurring, right? Anyway, glad you're with us today, Mr. Tran. So a couple of things on this list, Madam Chair. First of all, I think it's great to put in one place, and I do appreciate other members speaking about personnel updates that include not only hiring and retaining and retirements and people leaving, but also the evaluation process is also important. We have traditionally found out, just as we do the evaluation of the superintendent, how is the evaluations going of school leaders doing it of their teachers, of the deputy superintendents doing it of their school leaders, of the superintendent doing it of the deputy superintendents and other direct reports, et cetera. You inspect what you expect. And we have said the past few years how important it is for people to get evaluations. And so us looking at that is an important measurement. Two other things that I think may be helpful since you're trying to capture this. One is also keeping a running list of items that we should be receiving. There may not necessarily be agenda items, but information we should be receiving on a regular basis. And the one that jumps to me the most is we should be receiving a monthly report on how we're doing versus budget. And then typically we do have a financial you have on the list here, financial update December 14th, but typically we should be receiving at a minimum a quarterly report from the CFO in the form of a memo, but often it could be done more often as well. And so I'm sure there are other things like this that we should be keeping on a list of information we should be receiving. The second is, since the purpose of this is to plan out our calendars and to think about how to make the best use of our time as members and of the public's time, we should also appropriately reflect that we often have executive sessions, particularly around collective budgeting, collective bargaining discussions. And so we almost know we can plan those out, that we're going to have a certain amount per quarter, because we do have a fairly substantial number of collective bargaining agreements with a range of a number of unions. And then the second piece is we often honor members of the BPS community. And we know certain things are going to happen annually. Once a year, we're going to honor everybody who got a doctorate in the past year, as an example. We are going to honor those who get national teaching certificates. We're going to honor Teachers of the Year. There are a number of ways that we honor both employees and student groups. And again, in terms of thinking about, and a number of them are very specifically happening once a year, but they do add up in time and attention. And if we're keeping a list of reoccurring agenda items and we're thinking about how to make best use of our time, that's a list we should be thinking of as well.
Alrighty. Thank you. Any other comments?
I have a comment.
Oh yeah, okay, there you are. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I think one of the pieces that is really top of mind for me is the physical state of many of our school buildings, and especially given the continuous testimony that we hear from students, parents, and educators. I'm wondering if, I know the jargon is a little bit new to me, so apologies if it's hidden somewhere in these agenda items, but wondering how we can get a consistent update or a regular update on what improvements we are conducting, as well as what are some of the long-term planning. I know that Build BPS exists, but I think just getting a reflection of the immediate needs and then the long-term pieces that need to be addressed around their school facilities is a priority for me.
One thing for just your information, Ms. LaPera, is the capital budget is the budget that speaks to the facility improvements that would be on the agenda. And the Massachusetts School Building Authority statements of interest are also related to the facilities and new builds and programs for that. So
Mm-hmm.
those two pieces are there, and then Bill PPS updates as well we would be giving, but that probably wouldn't be like a standing one. It's what we have to design as part of Bill PPS. So I think what this one is like looking historically and looking back at what has been recurring, but there's been a lot of other reports that come to the school committee, like Bill PPS or school closures, those kinds of things, mergers, pathways. The strategic plan's not listed here, which would be an important piece to be reporting on as well.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate that context.
Mhm.
It's good to get
Mr.
all
Pratt.
of these out though, Madam Chair, it's good to get all of these out, and then maybe
Yeah.
which ones would be recurring and which ones might be in
For-
like a
yeah.
specific policy, like exam schools might not
Mhm.
need to have that forever, but you need it now because we're implementing policy on it.
Yes. I would agree. Mr. Tran, do you have your hand raised?
Yes, I'm sorry, I raised my hand second time, but
That's okay.
part of the recurring agenda items, I like to echo Member O'Neill regarding labor relation issues. But on top of that, first of all, we have many CBAs with different, collective bargaining agreements with different work groups within the school system. I like to be updated regularly on any kind of issue in relation to labor relations that may affect us, given the busing, the school bus issue recently, and the presence of police in the schools a few years ago. The students, the teachers lack of enthusiasm to attend in schools instruction during the COVID, things of that nature. I would like to make sure that we are on top of it. If there is a need to make it into the kind of what do you call that, executive meeting session, yes, then we should do that, because I, as a member, am very concerned about things that are legal that affect us. So labor relation should be on the agenda. The BTU, the Boston Teacher Union, the school bus, the Translab Union, whatever, and any kind of ancillary legal issues that may come forward, we should know ahead of time. So at least I can prepare myself, or if necessary, I may have some input or some of my opinions on it. So just to make it short, I'm taking a lot of time. I like to see a recurring agenda item on legal issues, particularly in relation to labor relations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else before we move forward? Ms. Costello, did you have your hand raised?
No.
No, okay, it was there. I'm sorry.
Always
I
happy to
think,
come in.
yeah, I think this conversation leads us into the next piece of this, which was members' priority suggestions. And And a little bit later, we're gonna, I mean, some of what people have raised is something that we are going to look at a little bit later as we look at our task force to begin to thinking about, do we need standing committees, or how would you know, a group of standing committees help us with some of these concerns we've just raised. So we'll be coming back to revisit this conversation we've just had as we look forward to that slide. But at the moment, these are some of the issues that people have raised. And again, you know, whether, you know, I don't think we can do all of them. I think we want all of this information. We are a big district, and, you know, trying to figure out how we begin to have some of these conversations are going to be critical as we think about both, as I think about it in 3 buckets: the superintendent's report and what that will contain in terms of updates and information and ongoing recurring updates there. What comes to us as full-fledged reports, and then what come to us as policy things that we will have to, you know, vote on. And, you know, and how can we all keep as much up to date around all of BPS as we want to. So we'll just go through this list to see if there are any things that people have want to add to these sort of general ones. So one is, you know, in general, looking at how do we communicate. I feel like we've heard a lot from parents and others about what they know and what they don't know. And it would be good to have a better, you know, a high overview of the district's communication practices, everything between the district and the school committee, parents, community, internal and external. You know, how do we improve our in communications? For example, we're investing a lot right now in a lot of the interpretation. How are people using this? Is this helpful? Are the people who need it able to access it? And are they finding it helpful? That's just one example, but there are many others. Another piece that comes up a lot through some of the work that we've been doing is the whole issue of transitions. As we move to a K-6, 7 to 12, or K-8, 9 to 12, how are we helping parents in advance to think about the repercussions, and do we have the resources? So as we have built K-6 schools, do we have enough 7 to 12 transitions so that students are not having to either join another K-8 before they can go to 9 to 12, you know? So we need some update both on logistically what's happening in the district, but also some information. How are we informing and keeping our families and others up to date on what are the possibilities? We're already beginning to see emails coming in from folks trying to navigate and understand what are the things that are, you know, available. The Transformation Schools update. We've spent a lot of time this year talking about our exam schools, and we know that 1/3 of our schools are in transformation. We really need to understand what is going on there, what we can do to help, what the district is doing, how parents are feeling, just any number of issues around the transition schools. As we look at some of our high school issues, the science, tech, voc ed issues, you know, what is our comprehensive plan to strategize around supporting students either in vocational or college-bound programs? There was news today that was talking about how people are beginning to look differently at vocational education for more than just an option for people that don't want to go to college, but that there are so many now jobs that you can come out of high school with making quite a great salary. And so, you know, improving our voc ed programs, particularly our voc ed STEM programs, is another critical conversation we need to become aware of. It may be already happening in the district. Teacher supports and training, PD, what's required of the district, what are we offering through grants, who pays, do teachers receive stipends, who evaluates, do people feel that, you know, this is working for them? so that we can make sure that our teachers are getting the supports that they feel they need in order to do the job we want them and need them to do for our students. Next slide, please. Facilities we've talked about, and again, the long-term planning addressing needs. High schools, increasing quality across the board. What are we doing about this? Again, the 7 to 12, 9 to 12. Are there options for developing new high schools or transitioning high schools? Just hearing more about the high school redesign as we're beginning to implement this new K-8, K-6, 7 to 12 issues. All of the issues around English language learners, especially supporting instruction and the status of native language instruction. Out of school time and programming, after school, before school, summer connections, what's happening as we're transitioning through COVID, but what is the planning that is also going on, particularly around summer, et cetera. We've already talked about educator diversity and the timelines and all of those things. Literacy is one of our critical issues that I'm sure, given the new emphasis on district literacy, we'll be looking at more of. And then special education models in instruction. Are there other things? I know people have already listed some in the earlier slides, but are there other issues that people want to make sure that we are aware of thinking about that haven't been listed thus far?
Madam Chairman, as you make this long list, a huge list, I'm exhausted just hearing it.
Yes.
One of the things I want to, all of which is very important and critical. But one of our challenges, I think, that we hear as a constant criticism of the district, and I think some of the feedback from we got the Council of Great City Schools, is our lack of coherence. And I'm worrying, as you make this list about things that we have to deal with in our every other week committee meetings, some month of the year, how are we going to organize that in a coherent manner? Because some of these issues are frankly operational, and we would need the superintendent to be able to articulate the manner in which work in that area is leading to the higher level goals that we're holding her accountable to. So how much do we in our meetings need to come forward there? How much needs to be assigned to our various task force? And how much is and what is really the superintendent's responsibility? And that as we supervise and double check on crises, we would come forward. So how much do we have to become experts? Because not all of us are degreed in education, and this is not all of our work. And so as we make this list, I get worried that we may be too all over the map and too engaged to be objective when it comes to the hard decisions we have to make. So I just want to put that as a caution of thinking we can get all this into our meetings, or whether we should and start to discriminate. What's the superintendent's job to which we're holding accountable, and what are the leverages that we're looking at to make that happen?
Yes. No, I would agree with you 100%. I just wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to hear what people were interested in so that we can go back and do exactly the sort that you're talking about. That some things really are in our purview, and others may be things that, there are other mechanisms that we can be pointed in the direction of where to find the information. Or they may come up, occasionally in the superintendent's report. But personally, it was just more important that people weren't wondering about things. If they had an issue that they were concerned, at least it could get put out there. And then as we go through and look at the agendas that we absolutely need to do, that are the responsibilities, we can see what is falling out that may be of interest, but may not be critically connected, but there may be a way that, there are ways within the district where that information is available that people can be pointed in the direction of. But no, I do not see us trying to cover all of these issues at all, but trying to at least begin to understand, you know, what each person is interested in learning more about.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. All righty.
Chair
So-
Robinson, you have Ms.
Yes.
Mercer with her hand raised.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Go ahead.
My suggestion was just going to be talking about I guess student involvement and student engagement as well. And then under like the transparency or communication part, adding at least the language of students in there, because again, like this is our education and we should have some kind of voice or thought or some kind of input into it.
Yes, and also that needs, I think that was missing from our regular updates and reports list as well. That we do have a monthly, at least a monthly official report back from VSAC. So we want to make sure that that gets on the calendar, but absolutely, thank you. Okay. All righty, let's move on, Ms. Costello.
So Madam Chair, one of the things that Ms. Sullivan and I have done here is taking a look at the next 3 months of the school committee calendar, the remaining of this year, and proposed some agenda items based on the priority of things that need to come before the committee, and also based on updates that we either regularly give or have heard from the committee members that they would like to hear. So our next school committee meeting is October 27th, and we will be bringing forth a presentation on an annual update on the strategic plan, Build BPS, and a very small report on one of the Horace Mann Charter School MOU renewals, so BDA MOU. For the November meetings, we have a meeting on November 3rd and November 17th, and combined between those two meetings, we are bringing forth the academic vision, the athletic policy, the hiring update, and a MassCore update. And then in December, we have 2 meetings. We have the 1st and the 15th. And so far we have a financial update and another Build BPS update. Keeping in mind that your suggestion of trying to keep it at 2 presentations or 2 reports per school committee meeting, there's definitely some room to add in December, but other, the meetings in November are pretty packed already, but it doesn't mean we can't add more.
Okay, can you explain a little bit the difference? I see Build BPS is coming up a lot. So will those meetings all have different agenda or being updating agenda? Will there be specific agenda for each of those distinctly?
Sure, and Superintendent, feel free to jump in here as well, but my understanding, I mean, this is something that we've heard a lot from families is wanting more information about Build BPS and the state of our facilities and those projects. And so Chief Cooter and the team have talked about doing a quarterly update to provide the immediate projects, some of the future projects, the overall state of our facilities, et cetera. So that's why we see Build BPS on here a couple of times. And he's also wanted to align it with some of the capital planning or the budget presentations that are also done.
That's correct. And the meeting on Build BPS coming up October 27th is really to take the formal vote on the 3 closures, the Jackson Man, the Timothy, and the Irving schools, which we have already briefed the school committee on, but this is the formal vote. And then to announce the quarterly progress that we want to have and the community engagement process that we want to take on the future projects within our facilities 10-year facility plan as it aligns to the capital budget.
Great. You can tell me this is asking too much, but I really like having the outline of what's coming ahead. And if we got this as a calendar, planning calendar, if you could put a sentence or two around the focus of each of these agenda items, it could help members to think if they have any additional questions, or at least to wrap their heads around what the topic is a bit in advance of actually getting the meeting materials.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great suggestion. One thing Ms. Sullivan and I are going to do following this retreat is to really take a look at everything that's been suggested here and put a proposed calendar forward to you as the chair and to the other members. And therefore, I think that's when we can add the sentence description so that people understand exactly what the presentation would be.
One other thing, Madam Chair, is when to decide if a topic is so dense that it requires more than a report of the school committee. For instance, the academic vision, I think, could be introduced in a presentation at the school committee, but look at all that's on our agenda for that night.
Right.
And I think it's better fit for a retreat where we could really dive in and have members ask us questions around special education, around ELL, around our general education programming, around our pathways. And so I do think that in December, I would like to recommend that one of the meetings turns into a retreat where we really dive deeply into the academic vision. So we could present it more broadly in November, take questions from members, and then dig deeper into those suggestions and questions, and then have those ready for a retreat where we do a real deep dive into particularly our EL learners, our special ed learners, and our EL learners who are also special ed.
Okay, thank you.
And we could also talk about recovery at that time as well, with, you know, the effects of what we anticipate from the pandemic might take a couple years for some of our students.
So we would add that as another agenda item in November or December?
It's already in November. What I'm saying is I'm suggesting that one of the two meetings, the 12-1 or 12-15, is more of a retreat than a business meeting.
Okay. No, I was referring to the issue is, should we have an update meeting about the impact of COVID, or you're saying that is what the agenda for the academic vision would be? I was just trying to get
I would say that would be aligned to the academic vision, and that would be inclusive also of what Mr. DeRujo was asking for as well, in terms of our summer planning, which is ongoing right now. As we're starting to plan already for next summer and what that's going to look like in terms of recovery.
Great. Before we move on, want to give members an opportunity to weigh in on this 3-month schedule. Anyone have any questions before we move on? Okay, let's move on to the proposed winter.
So Madam Chair, this is very light right now in anticipation of taking a look at the required items and also some of the priority issues that members brought up tonight. We will certainly be filling this in more detail, but this is to just give folks a sense of some of the things that are pre-scheduled for the January, February, and March meetings so that they see how much room we have to add. And Ms. Sullivan can correct me if I'm wrong, but typically there's about 2 meetings a month.
Right, except that we have additional meetings around the budget.
Yes. Yeah, so that will be additional meetings that will be added.
And hearings, right?
Yeah, the budget hearings, yeah.
Which we have to decide if those will be in person or remote.
Right. And they, I don't know whether anybody's done any comparison in terms of the attendance. Have we had better attendance over the last year and a half with the remote budget hearings than we did when we were meeting in person?
Yeah, we could certainly look into that and provide that information. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments, questions here before we move on? Dr. Coleman?
One of the
You're on
things
mute.
too, yeah, one of the things that as we look at the difference of attendance in doing the COVID to the budget hearings versus other years is also to remember that we were not cutting anything this year. We had an enormous
true.
amount of resources, and that my memory is many of the other meetings were
Protests.
attendance was driven by concern about what's happening in particular schools because we were defunding, underfunding, or moving monies around that were very threatening to them. So as we do that analysis, I think we have to think through what were the drivers for attendance.
Thank you.
That's
Good
right.
point.
Dr. Coleman, that is something that I was actually quoted in the paper saying that, you know, we were in a fortunate position during these past several years of having the $100 million investment over the 3 years, which is very rare for a school district to get 3 years of a promise note. And also just really wanting the public's input into the $1.4 billion that we have in our operating budget and the types of ways that we are using that funding. And there's been a lot of interest in ESSER, which is short-time funding, but we have not seen similar interest in the 1.4 billion overall. There has been some really wonderful feedback from some groups and some advocacy groups who have provided really good feedback. But outside of that, we haven't seen a broader feedback. So that's something for the group to consider and how we could reach a more diverse group of parents and community stakeholders in our overall budget process. Hopefully school equity roundtables could help us with that.
Okay, let's move on to April to June.
So you'll see here lots of open space to prioritize and add presentations, but we do typically in May bring forward the Massachusetts School Choice Program for a hearing and vote. And then in June, we have committed to doing an exam school admissions policy update for this year.
The superintendent's.
Yeah.
Evaluation.
Evaluation should be early. Hopefully we could, I mean, it's very difficult with all the data, but that should be the first week in May would be the best day to get the initial one done so that we could have it voted beforehand. And then I would also put it, this would be a good time for the task force to give their annuals. The task force has historically given annual reports then, and then they would have what work has been accomplished and what the plans for the next year, because that can feed into the superintendent's goals for the following year.
It's a great idea, Dr. Coleman. Thank you.
Would you suggest April and May then? Because I think we have 3 standing task forces, the EL, the OAG.
ELLs, OAG, school quality. I think I would advocate that we bring SpedPAC up, as I know that they meet some separately. They're not quite a task force, but I would want an annual report from SpedPAC at that time. Report questions and challenges for us as we make the plans for the next year, at least. And then this may be where the audit. I agree with the sentiment that many of our colleagues, this is where, the whole hiring report would be a good time for us to think about that in terms of the whole human resources report, which has a lot of factors to it that's worth a lot of our time. And I would also, I said the audit already, but there was another issue that, the human resources and then facilities. The kind of a global omnibus facilities report would be something that would be very useful, very detailed, very boring, but we are worried building by building. We don't want another West Roxbury in our hands, and we need that report sooner than later so we can start being informed and so that we can begin to ask the questions that the city needs to be addressed.
Yeah, Dr. Coleman, one thing, so Chief Cooter has talked about doing a Build BPS update and facilities update in October, December, sometime late February, March, and then late spring. So it would be appropriate to add that here as well.
Some deep level work that Indira Alvarez, our Chief Operating Officer, is working on is our actual facilities index. And she is working with her team to update the review that was done in 2017. And so I really hope to bring that forward as soon as that work is completed as well. So we have a really great base of data on the conditions within our facilities that's been updated.
On that, if I had a lot of money, I would love to have us have a master campus plan done by an external architectural firm who has expertise in going deep and hard, and just do one that would set the goals for the next 10 years. But I don't have that much money right now.
Thank you. Yeah. I know we have the BDA MOU coming up. Are there other charters, in-district charters or other schools that will also be coming up for their annual review at some point during this year?
Yeah, so there's certainly, I think they're either 3 or 5 years, right? So it does depend on when it expires and it's brought forward, but I do anticipate that in the spring, our legal advisor will recommend we bring a couple more forward. We renewed, I think, 5 or 6 last year, if I remember correctly.
Right, okay. And again, this is a parking lot issue, but I have felt, annually we do the reviews of the Horace Mann and other charters, but that sometimes means that as a committee, we have more information about schools that we work with versus the schools that are, within our own portfolio, that don't get that kind of a rigorous review or opportunity to present themselves. And I don't know how to do that. I'm hoping that we will do some of that with our schools that are in transformation, but it's just a note of how do we get to know our own schools differently than the way that, by law, we get to know some much better than many others. So
Chairman Robinson, in fact,
Yeah.
every school every year does a school improvement plan.
Right.
It's a required, so they do, maybe not quite as in depth as some of the charts we see, but they do functionally that. And that happens every year. We just don't have a system unless we go looking for it, of looking at those plans. So the data's there. It's engaged with the school, the site, the parent councils, and they sign off, the principal. So they're there. The question is, what's a useful way for us to see that? Is that by assistant superintendent and get them all that we get to live, but it's there. So but how do we get the reports is the question. The data is there, and it's not extra work for anybody to create the report, just about figuring out how we can access it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Just because we had started talking a bit about the task forces, can we reverse the next 2 slides and bring up the slide on task forces?
Absolutely. So these are the task forces that the school committee has, the ELL, OAG, and school quality.
Okay, I want to invite the superintendent to talk a little bit about other kinds of working groups that we might think about incorporating. I mean, we've started talking about the need for some tangentially in our earlier conversation, but she and I had talked earlier today about other means of having a different level of working groups for school committee members and public to be able to go deeper into some of the issues that we aren't necessarily right now monitoring.
Well, thank you, Madam Robinson. One of the things that I talked with both chairs before you was a little bit of the experience that I've had with school boards and what they call standing committees. they're ongoing committee member-led committees that take on the topics of whatever the committee is. For instance, one of those is a budget committee. And then they engage with the public, and they have some appointed number of public on those committees, parents, students, general advocates, teachers, etc., who sit on those, however you want to structure them. And then they meet whatever frequency you want them to meet at. And that gives the public an opportunity to engage in the governance of the district with the school committee members and this committee, the standing committee. And then they report back to the full body the work of that committee. Sometimes they'll make policy recommendations, or they'll review, for instance, the yearly budget, and then they'll bring it back to the full body. So ones that I've seen in the past are personnel committee. Given Mr. Tran's interest in this area, this might be something he's interested as well as Dr. Coleman with the hiring and the diversity hiring. So, a committee could take those types of things, look at our recruitment, retention efforts, look at our contracts, look at our unions and how those contracts are written, and then bring forward recommendations. There's typically an academic and curricular committee that looks at the academics and curricular programs of the district. They could review curriculum. They could set up reviews, for instance, for purchasing. If there's issues with a library and censorship of books, they can take up that kind of thing. There's just all kinds of work for an academic committee. Another committee that is a standing committee that I've been familiar with is the facilities one, or looking at the overall assignment systems and planning for the district. So those are different types of standing committees that you could put together. And then there's the task forces were more time limited. So similar to the exam school task force, where you would put together a committee or a task force that had a specific charge, and then they would bring back recommendations to the committee, to the full body. That's a
Okay.
structure that you could
think
adopt,
about,
think about.
Yeah, currently we have the task forces, and all of these task forces pretty much have been long-term, as you can see from the number of years that they have been when they were established. And so trying to understand how standing committees, task forces would work. I mean, what do we call each of these things? Would you see our current task forces becoming standing committees and expanded with additional titles, and thinking differently about what a task force might be that would be more time limited?
Well, I think that's up for the school committee to decide what task forces they would have and which would be standing committees.
Okay.
Another issue is membership, and how in terms of membership and how members are on, and how often the term changes over on those committees. That's just important also for the school committee to reconcile with.
Okay. Dean Coleman?
Mr. O'Neill had his hand up before I did.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see Mr. O'Neill's hand. Go ahead, Mr. O'Neill.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. So Superintendent, thoughtful suggestion. Obviously, in your time with Commissioner, you dealt with many different school boards. And so you've seen a variety of ways how it's handled. And what this is really bringing up, Madam Chair, is really a governance style that we need to think about. Those of us who attended the Accelerated Board Capacity Program at Harvard that the Council of Great City Schools put on, and talks with fellow school boards across the country, knows that there are a couple of different styles of governance. And so You have committees that tend to act as committee as the whole, as we do. And then we have several standing task forces and a couple of others, such as the internal audit one, which again was put together by us, is not actively working right now. And the inclusion task force as well would be two others. But and then as the superintendent and the chair alluded to, others that, you know, are more for set times. But what we're really getting at here, and I'm trying to slow down for the interpreters, thank you for the reminder, is the base level governance structure that we want. Do we want to operate as a committee as a whole, where we are all together on issues, discussing issues, or an alternative method that a number of our peer districts use, as the superintendent alluded to, tends to break down more into committees. And it could be an audit committee, it could be an academics committee, the facilities committee, personnel committee, et cetera, as the superintendent was suggesting. And a lot more, it allows, as the superintendent said, more community involvement, because similar to the internal audit task force, where I was the school committee member assigned to it, and then we had, I think, close to 10 outside experts in that field on it, all from Boston, all from the community. So the standing committees do allow you to have more involvement, but school board meetings then end up being more, I don't want to quite say perfunctory, but it is more, operates off a consent calendar, where you are simply accepting and approving the committee reports. And these are really two different styles. And you know, this it's particularly based upon the superintendent's experience as a commissioner and dealing with, you know, seeing the pros and cons literally in action. I think we could also ask for, you know, this may be something that some members of the committee could kind of step away and look at and work, for example, with the council. I'm sure AJ Crabhill, the governance expert, can give us some examples of how Miami handles things. They're ones that does a lot through standing committees, as an example, and a bunch of other cities, and then kind of come back and say to us, here are the pros and cons of each. You know, maybe we do this as another, you know, we go off on the side, look at it, and then come back a month, 2 months down the line with the pros and the cons. You know, here's how it's done in these cities, and actually talk to some school board members in other cities, which we can obviously easily arrange to speak with the chairs and members in a couple of districts and superintendents as well, and understand the pros and cons of the kind of the two leading governance methods of doing everything by committee or everything as a committee as a whole.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Yes. Dean Coleman.
Yeah, following up on that, one of the questions, one of the things that AJ Crabbill, when he was with us, pointed out the difference between a task force and a committee. And task force should be really focused on a time limit problem, like the exam school. Or we bring them together, we have a time limit, we need to bring it together, a diverse group to really take on one of our major problems and develop their expertise and give a report for us to review and then move forward on, as opposed to other committees that may be at personnel or school quality, or that are ongoing issues that we address. And so I think that's one of the distinctions that for the review would bring to us. And whether we're, because we are a appointed committee versus an elected committee, what's the role of having subcommittees in terms of what that work? Those are all things that we need to consider. And I think spending time on that and in the short term, we could think about whether we want to go forward with saying, well, what's a task force? What's a standing committee? And then give those charges now, while we're also to what we're currently doing, while we're also examining a future structure.
Right. So to that point, do we have a couple of members who would want to take this on to go and do some review of other places and come back and give us, you know, some ideas of suggestions of moving forward?
As long as it means going to San Diego and Miami. Doing.
I think over Zoom, certainly.
Virtually.
Virtually, you can go anywhere you'd like.
I think we need to pause and reflect on that question.
Okay.
Mr.
Madam
Davis,
Chair,
your hand.
can I,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm scrolling back and forth here. Go ahead, Mr.
sorry,
Derujo.
thank you. And I apologize, I had to slip out, but I caught pieces of Mr. O'Neill's comments.
Okay.
And well, I'll just say what I was hoping is that this is an area where I think committing resources, I think it would be really, really valuable for us as an institution, which Mr. O'Neill may have said, to getting a consultant from the Council on Great City Schools, helping us work through a process, do kind of, I know I was hearing when I went to the Harvard Business School retreat, kind of working through retreats like this and helping, hey, this is what this model gives you, this is what that model gives you. Other school committees across the country that have been through that. But so I just want to, I think that's what Mr. O'Neill was saying. I just want to second that this is, as we consider also our own budget, I think money well invested to get these pieces, in good order. So, and I would be happy to help on that if I'm able to. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments?
The only thing that I would add, and I think I said these in my earlier comments when I talked about the subcommittees, was the membership and the length of terms, just so that a bunch of folks out in the community have the same opportunity to be able to participate in the governance of the district.
Right. Dr. Coleman, were you working on something about the review of what we currently have? Do I recall that correctly?
I have taken a lot of notes about that. Working on it would be a positive interpretation of where I am. But yes, I've structured it. I have an outline. And if you'd want me to bring that forward to present, and that's more looking at our current ways to focus on our current structure and recharge our current committees. I was not looking at a more significant reallocation of the work, but I can do. Okay. I can be prepared to bring that forward fairly with a deadline. I could get that done.
Okay. Hopefully, we could bring that forward in the new year when we have our fully confirmed committee. But also at that point, it would be great to get AJ Crabble or someone from the Council of Great City Schools to come back with us as we continue to look at this structure. And also that will lead us right into the this where we sort of have paused, but the work that we did last year with AJ too on the goals and the guardrails, the values. Do you want to flip back to that slide, please? So last April, we did approve the goals and values. And some of what we set were these targets on early literacy, achievement for English language learners, achievement for students with disabilities, critical thinking, college, career, and life readiness, and then the values. And one of our goals is to look at how these goals and values and associated presentations are focusing our agenda. So the question is, how do we balance all of the things we must do and still be able to move our own focus forward on these goals and values? So I think that's one of the biggest dilemmas that we have of being able to stay focused, but also to do the greater work that we've already seen as being outlined for us. So I wanted to have a moment here to have some thoughts, questions, suggestions of ways of moving forward with this. Dr. Coleman?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think we're really close to this, and I think we do a lot of this work already. It's just a matter of labeling it as such. So one thing that I would put on the table is one of the things the superintendent has been working on, which I think is a service very, very well. A lot of the problems we have is a more coherent and useful data dashboard. That we have, that we have our data at hand and we can see it. We can refer to it outside the meetings, but certainly within the meetings. And as we think about the goals we've established for the year, if every meeting, we should spend at least some time on one of those goals. So if we have 4 goals and a useful data dashboard as part of the superintendent's report, we could get an update on one each, and then that would we'd get 2 to 3 reports a year on the goals we've established before we get to the end of the year evaluation. So in the classic school improvement approach that is beginning to become more prevalent across the district, if in February we see that the data is not lining up to the strategies, the next month we would want a change of strategy to be more effective. So not waiting a whole year before we reconsider a change of action. So you asked that in the superintendent's evaluation last week. You asked, well, how do we know and what will we do if it's not going forward? And I think using the goals, using a data dashboard, using it as a regular report would allow us to make those mid-course corrections rather than wait until there's the house is burnt down.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts, comments? Rafaela, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Regularmente tengo que hacer un ejercicio de cambiar, switchar el micrófono, por eso me tardo un poquito. Yo quisiera mencionar sobre donde hablábamos del goal de la comunicación con las familias.
I would like to mention the communication with the families.
¿Cómo podemos evaluar que realmente las familias están teniendo una buena comunicación con las escuelas?
How could we evaluate that the families are having a good communication with the schools?
Estamos insistiendo, ¿verdad?, de que los padres se involucren en los concilios de padres.
So we are insisting that parents become part of the school councils.
Pero para que eso suceda, nosotros tenemos que asegurarnos de que los padres tengan interpretación en su idioma.
For that to happen, we need to make sure that the parents will have interpretation in the schools.
Muchos principales, y me consta, han hecho mucho esfuerzo, han dado la milla extra, porque en las reuniones, al no tener un intérprete, han incluso utilizado personal de la escuela para que los padres puedan entender y puedan tener interpretación en las reuniones.
So many principals, and I can testify to that, have made many efforts to provide interpretation for the parents, even when they have to use their own school personnel to come out and interpret for the parents.
Pero nosotros debemos pensar en estrategia, tanto que los ayudar dentro de las escuelas para que el personal que dirige también pueda estar entrenado en el uso de Zoom y de la interpretación, porque muchas veces no saben el dominio de cómo tener una interpretación simultánea o cómo no, sé que es algo nuevo.
We also have to make sure that we think of strategies to help the personnel to use the new tools that we have in this system using Zoom, simultaneous interpretation. So we should be thinking of these new strategies.
Y también insistir mucho en que las comunicaciones puedan llegar a las familias dependiendo del idioma que la familia hablen. Estamos hablando de que queremos inclusión, ¿verdad? Que queremos que los padres de diferentes nacionalidades se involucren, pero si no le proveemos las herramientas para que ellos vengan y puedan participar, no vamos a ser tan efectivos.
So we are saying that communication must be a very important part of the family and the school. We are saying that we need to have inclusion of the parents' participation in the schools. So we need to provide the tools for this to happen. So when they come in, the communication can be effective because the schools have the tools to do it.
Por eso quiero insistir que es bien importante el involucramiento de las familias dentro de la escuela, pero repito, debemos proveerle servicios que ellos se sientan atraídos, que no digan, no puedo estar en la reunión porque no entiendo el idioma, sino que ellos se sientan que están siendo escuchados y entendidos.
So it's important, and I'm repeating myself, to get the families involved and have it such that the services that we offer the families are attractive so that they can feel included and they can feel that they are being understood, not only the language that they speak, you know, but the personnel that treats them with understanding.
Y aprecio mucho que, por ejemplo, la superintendente me ha tratado de hablar conmigo. Yo soy un ejemplo vivo. Ella me ha tratado de decir en español, me ha tratado de hablar. ¿Cómo me siento yo cuando ustedes tratan de hablarme en español y yo puedo entender lo que ustedes me puedan decir, aun cuando teniendo intérprete? Y sé que la superintendente ha hablado conmigo, me ha saludado en español y ha tratado. Y para mí eso es importante. Entonces, ¿cómo se sentirá un padre de otra nacionalidad, de otra lengua, cuando es tratado y entendido en su idioma?
So I just want to share that when the superintendent has tried to greet me in Spanish and to say hello or to speak few words in Spanish, you know, how grateful I feel. It is important, you know, when any of you come to greet me and say any word in Spanish, how welcoming that is for me. So we need to think of that for the families that speak other languages, and we need to provide that kind of welcoming into the school so they feel attracted to attending the schools and participating. So, you know, providing the interpretation like we're doing in these meetings is a great way of welcoming the community and the families.
Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for that. I think, again, this is a great example. Obviously, in our values, we've got the importance of student voice and family engagement. And then we talked earlier about wanting communication. So it's that balance between an operational issues that really does impact our goals and values at the same time. Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to thank Ms. Polanco Garcia for her comments and let her know how personally valuable I find them to be. We had a side conversation when we had the retreat for the training. And you mentioned to me, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Ms. Polanco Garcia, but I do hope it's okay that I share it, that you said you had, you know, a lot of the communities that you work with had an impression of what the school committee roles and responsibilities were. And you had learned a lot in your short time in the committee. And you and I kind of talked a little bit about how we have to get better at getting that message out, right? And meeting with our communities across the city, wherever they are. And you know, I think the chair and I would love to join. We have to be careful in having no more than 3 members at a meeting, right? But the chair and I would love to join you at a meeting, you know, with communities that you work with that you feel would benefit from that. Just as I know the chair and quite frankly, our past chair kind of really started the practice of trying to have more meetings with groups across the city that represent constituencies that are interested in our work, that you know, it can be partners with us, can also push our thinking in constructive ways. And you know, I'm thinking of SPEDPAC, I'm thinking of a bunch of the others that we started to meet with more frequency. And I think that is incumbent upon us. And it's one of the values we talk about here, student voice and family engagement. I'm a real believer in these goals and values. I think we did a lot of work to come up with them. I would not want us to abandon them. I would love to see us really embed this in our agenda planning going forward, as Dr. Coleman was alluding to. And I'd love to see us actually reaffirm these goals and values and plan them into the agenda. But, you know, as I started to say, that we consciously have more meetings with community groups across the city, not just the Wednesday meetings. I'm a big believer in them, and I know we're going to talk about public comment. I'm a huge advocate for public comment. I learn from it, I listen, it pushes my thinking, it gets me thinking about questions to ask both at the meeting and later. But that can't be the only opportunity for people to communicate with us. That and the emails that we receive and the calls that we receive as well. I would love to see us more actively reaching out in the community, and that we proactively commit to that.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that is something that we do need to think about. I know COVID has made it more difficult for people to get out and about, but I think, you know, superintendent will need some guidance from you about ways that school committee members can be invited in or welcome to visit schools or participate in meetings that schools are happening. I don't know whether, for example, schools are doing their equity roundtables on Zoom, and that perhaps that's a place that we can sometimes go into a school community, but also to be aware of other community advocacy meetings and get school committees able to participate in them virtually or in person when that is available. Something I would like to invite us all to do before we hit December is something that our past chair asked us to do last spring, which was we took the list of all of the school leaders and divvied it up and just called in to say, hello, how are things going? We appreciate all that you've been doing, and to get sort of a more personalized update. Those were some of the best conversations and communications I've ever had with school leaders. And it gives them a sense to know that we care and that we do care, but we often get a chance to hear and see a different level of what they are going for that can also help us to do our job better. So we'd like to hear from members a bit about thoughts that they might have of ways that we can be out there more within the community.
Okay.
Mr. Tran?
Yes. Looking at the school committee goals and values, you know, that we've been discussing, and we've been gathering all information surrounding it, and then put together these non-negotiable community values and goals. Well, there are things that are on it that have been on it since the beginning of time anyway, such as opportunity gaps, family engagement, community partnership, things of that nature. And I understand that we do have a standing committee, task force, whatever, whether those two are in any way, shape or form, and equivalent to each other, whatever it is. But I remember committee member Lupera last time had mentioned regarding guideposts and benchmark and something of that nature that would guide us to evaluate our own goals and our values with a little more objective, with a little more, objectivity. Since I have been looking at everything regarding these goals and values since I came on board about what 3 years now, more or less under the lens of subjectivity rather than objectivity. Like to see a hybrid of that, so that if I need to do some evaluation year by year on these kind of goals and values, while I'm very much in support and I applaud Superintendent Caselius' work on all these areas, and I strongly support you, as well as appreciating all of your work regarding community partnership, opportunity gaps, social and emotional, physical supports for students and maybe parents as well. However, I like a clearer picture with benchmark, guidepost, something that would help me evaluate my own self in making a determination in these areas, because these things have been on our agenda since I don't know, maybe way before I came on board as well. So and I understand it will remain there because it is our goals. But in order for me to make better assessment of my own evaluation, something a little different from the traditional things that we've been doing, that would help me. I would appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
If I understand you correctly, you're saying that you would like us to give more of an update of where we are to where we're going, or or what progress we've made in this past year around these issues?
Yes, but more. Say in terms of let's just say in terms of I'll give you an example. Let's just say in terms of opportunity gap. Last year let's say it's just an example. Say a year prior we had reached certain percentage, showing that the opportunity gaps had been closing in, and then the next year we had another percentage showing a small increase or small decrease. How do I look at that and evaluate the percentage in relation to whether that values or that goal have been achieved for that year? Because of the increase or decrease, but at a very infinitesimal percentage, does that help me to objectively or subjectively make an assessment that is a success or not? You know what I mean? What I'm trying to say is something to help me making my own assessment based on a very, very small increase in certain values, say 100% family engagement that we're looking for. Last year we had 55%, and this year we had 56%. Does that translate to, does that for me objectively translate to a success or not? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
I hear.
because you know, these are gonna be, these values and these goals are going to be there. I don't know, maybe way before I you know, way before I go up to the hill and lie next to my parents. It's gonna be there. But I like to be able to convince my community that, hey, look,
we're making progress. We're making progress.
I think he's looking at annual targets.
Right.
And did we not meet those annual targets?
Right.
Are they statistically significant or not?
Mhm.
Based on what we know in broad comparison, and also maybe comparisons against what national averages are, state averages, other like districts, in having that kind of easy access within a dashboard. Mr. Tron, I'd love to have that too. And so our team is working on dashboards.
Right.
I think we would have had these by now if we weren't in a pandemic and the ODA team hadn't been so swamped with exam school runs and the pandemic and everything that we've been doing. But we will absolutely work toward that goal. I think it's important for all of you all to know, but also just as important for our educators and our school leaders to know how they're progressing and whether the things that they're doing are mattering for our children's overall success. I think it's what Dr. Coleman likes to say, leading and lagging indicator.
Go ahead, Dr. Coleman, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Tran, thank you very much for saying this. And I don't normally like to repeat, but I want to reaffirm what the superintendent has just said, and that your question is spot on. The whole community has it, as you suggested. And as we move to an outcome-driven district, a data-driven district, using data to evaluate the superintendent, those are exactly the metrics that we're setting up. So as part of the superintendent's goals that we're evaluating for in our next meeting, and you know, if you're not comfortable with those as being the right ones, that's exactly where we, school committee, should say, now here's the data we need, and I'm going to hold the superintendent accountable for. So it's not a soft measure. It's not this floating, oh, we got better, we got worse. It's really, this is the goals we expect. And if we don't get there, what's the explanation? And we have to be satisfied with the explanation in order to continue with the superintendent. So I think we're moving in that direction. And I think we all have to look at those goals and be really clear that those are the ones that we want to measure progress by. And because we've committed to only having a few goals, we have to be ready to communicate that we can't do 10 things well. But here are the 4 things that we want to move on now, and that's what we're going to focus on. And then in a year or 2 years, we can add other things or change them out once we have success. But thank you for bringing that up, and I think we're on that direction, and very excited about that possibility.
Okay. Thank you. Before we move on to the next section, where I hope we can put everything we've been talking together into this meeting structure, I just want to check if anybody else has any comments before we move on. Yeah, I see somebody's hand raised. I'm scrolling. If somebody has their hand raised, just speak out.
Wonder if Zaira has any thoughts on the discussion.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Zaira.
I feel like it's hard for me to really speak out against it. I will not speak out against it, but speak up in this topic. I don't know. I feel like the student voice, I feel like I talk about it so much and say it so much because it's something I'm passionate about, like just having us be the forefront, having us be the actual leader in our education and say like, hey, I don't think that's gonna work because we would probably react to this way or et cetera, stuff like that. So I feel like I'm just repeating myself. I'm an endless loop. So yeah.
How would you like to see things work differently in terms of being able to see student voice take a more prominent position?
I would say, I guess making the student voice more diverse, because technically when we get student voices, usually from the students that are like the smart ones at the top of their class, the ones that are very active and engaged within their school body. But sometimes we want the quieter voices to speak up, because a lot of times they have the most to say, but just either are too scared to speak up or just don't have that time. And I say maybe push for that diversity, push for the students that are not as smart or students that aren't engaged that much within their school community. Like, ask them, why aren't you that engaged? Why don't you speak up that much? Like, see why they're not doing those things and figuring out a way to make them speak, I guess, speak more, engage more.
Are you talking about that as something that needs to be done at the school level? Or how do you see the work on the school committee supporting, you know, that kind of additional voice by students?
I feel like that's hard. I feel like it could be both a district thing and a school level thing, but it's just like, I guess, the way it's implemented or whatever kind of policy or something that gets in place to make that happen. I feel like it's hard because, again, it's like the typical, I guess, cycle of, okay, the smart kids, they're always going to be the ones getting these opportunities. I'm just going to sit back and not speak up that much. I feel like it's more of a mentality thing, more of a student mentality thing than of like both a student and, I guess, a school level mentality in a way. Because a lot of times, again, the smart kids are always the one who are getting pushed forward. Like, yeah, because you have this much grades, you're the leader. Because you have this lower grades, you're not a leader. You're more of, I don't know. I feel like it's hard to make it solely based on a school level and solely based on a district level. Maybe some way to have it connected in a way. I just don't know how.
Okay. Those are great questions, and I'm not sure how to do it either at this point, but we've got a lot of people here. Superintendent, do you have any thoughts more of other ways of making sure student voice gets represented both at the school level and supported here as well?
Oh, I'm sure the students themselves have like amazing ideas, but one is to return the student report to the school committee. So we want to have that be on our list of reports that we will be taking up. I didn't see it here, but I know that we typically do it every other month or every other meeting, I think.
Yeah, once a month. Yeah, we
yeah.
wanted to bring that back monthly.
That's good. I think also, you know, just making sure we have a multitude of different types of voices by lifting those up in town halls, Instagram chats that Zyra could host. You know, we could co-host different types of town halls on different topics with school committee members. They could be on the standing committees if you have standing committees, other BSAC members who, like on their BSAC bylaws that they just passed, they have someone who oversees budget, and they have a president, and they have different officers who could participate in some of the activities of the school committee as well.
How does that sound, Zyra?
I think that sounds actually amazing, but I feel like also another thing that also have to push that is maybe even talking more about like the student rep and getting like a vote on school committee. I feel like that conversation gets pushed back a lot and it's not really in the forefront. And I feel like that's a big part of student vote. I mean, yes, we do have a student rep on school committee, but to take that step further and really show how much student voice is needed and how much it's appreciated and how much it's the value of it is by having that vote.
Zyra, remind me what the MSBA trainer said, or the the Massachusetts School Committee member when we were in our Saturday training said something.
So I remember him saying that it was more of like a legistration thing rather than something that could be voted on actual school committee. And then I did also a little bit of research on it, and I had brought up the fact that it's right here, how California and Maryland is the only states that have a voting member on a local school boards, and then statewide it's California, Tennessee, Maryland, Vermont, and Massachusetts. But I know on the local boards they have a vote, but it's not actually counted as a vote. So it's like they say yes or no, but it's not actually counted towards anything.
Do you remember what he said though? I'm trying to remember something about you guys being paid or something with that changed the rules and made you somehow liable.
I don't remember.
Mr. O'Neill, do you remember, Ms. LaPera?
Yeah, there was discussion about pieces around gifts. And
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah.
so if student reps if student reps were official voters and paid
Yeah.
for being on school committee, how they could be held liable for any potential gifts that they may receive, just like we all have conflict of interest laws that we abide by.
But I think when it came up, it also came up because Ms. Mercer asked about scholarships, then could they accept scholarships?
Correct. And I believe he said that there was an exception with scholarships, and so that there was a way to do it in which it wouldn't be perhaps like the student representative wouldn't necessarily be employed by the city the way we are.
Yeah. I just remember being surprised by that.
Yeah, there's some twists and turns in there for sure.
Yeah.
But I appreciate Ms. Mercer's comments. I think
Mhm.
student voice is incredibly important. And there's that's definitely a topic for consideration that we should be thinking and acting on.
Yeah, I think very much we're all interested in understanding how to work this thing through. And I know that right now the Council of Great City Schools just started a new work group for student school committee members. So I feel like, I think they meet once a month on a Thursday night, and I'm hoping that you will be able to clear your schedule to be able to participate in those, because I feel that will be a great place to bring this concern to figure out how other voices across the country are dealing with this very same topic, and collectively what you all might be able to do to be able to move forward the idea of a vote and what that would mean. We very much respect and value the voice that you bring. You've asked great questions and you raise great issues. And so, even though you may not feel that you have a vote, believe me, your voice is very much heard and respected and appreciated by members. And what you say really does impact how we think about moving forward, and do very much want to make sure that we're doing all we can to make sure all student voices are being heard and considered as policies are moving forward. Thank you. Mr. O'Neill, did you want to add something? No? Okay, anyone else before we move forward to our meeting structure? I want to thank everyone for their comments. This has all been very helpful, particularly as we get to the point of, so with all of this information that we are looking for and needing, and decisions that we need to be making, the one time that we are before the public is our biweekly meetings. How do we look at the structure of those meetings, the content of those meetings, to be able to answer all of the questions that not only we're asking, but also what the public is asking, in a way that makes coherent sense and is providing people with the appropriate level of updates, et cetera, that they needed. So as we look at our meeting, here's what is in our meeting right now. We have superintendent reports, grants, reports that are updates and reports that are looking for votes in a policy. And then we have public comment issues. And then finally, we can remain remote until April 1st. But then how do we look at how our meetings will be dealt with after that? So people want to talk about the meeting structure as it stands and what their thoughts are, recommendations for content within these constructs of what's happening, or just the thoughts about how the meeting time is utilized to move forward. I've heard people loud and clear that having 5, 6, 7 hour meetings can be counterproductive. People are working and are tired, and being on Zoom for 5 or 6 hours can be exhausting. So looking for better ways of handling our time, our content. We've talked somewhat about when we get reports. If we can get them earlier than when we've been getting them, then people will have more time to read them and digest them ahead of time so they can feel better prepared. So it's sort of all of the above. So I'd like to open it up for conversation.
Madam,
Comment.
can I just add one detail
Sure.
here that I'm going to lift up? So two things. One, Ms. Sullivan and I did put in the current school committee policy around public comment. So this is actually what the policy is. It's not how we usually do public comment, right? The chair has the authority to overrule that, but I did want to point that out. And then in terms of the in-person versus remote, the current law does allow us to go until April 1st. I do anticipate that the state legislature will take this up at some point, because if we go back to the old law, we can't do hybrid meetings, right? So it's just all in person, including public comment. So I do anticipate that the state legislature over the next several months are going to be talking about that, and I can certainly keep the committee updated on those.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Well, I'll jump in on putting two conversations together. One public comment and the other is community engagement. Frankly, I'm not always as convinced that the public comment allows for community engagement, problem solving. So let's say the percentage of public comment that's around a request for personal customer service, all of which is important to address, but I'm not sure that we're the place where that's most useful. Often the superintendent ends up having them and then referred to someplace else. Some of the repetitions in the comment, and I'm respectfully willing to, I've heard Mr. O'Neill, I respect his position. I also have learned a lot of things, a lot of the questions are very useful, but it's a lot of time that I'm not sure we're moving forward in collaboration with our communities around improving the schools. And so one of the reasons I'm excited about rethinking the committee work is, in fact, oftentimes it's in those smaller task force, ELL, achievement gap, school quality. If we had a infrastructure group that met regularly, where people who have issues around their building could come and really deeply engage at a longer time, or even join that committee, seems to me a more a way to have student community engagement that's productive and not as oftentimes inflammatory as or frustrating, because you get to get your 2 minutes or your 3 minutes and then boom. So that's one point. If we can use our other committees more effectively to engage communities, more reach out, whether less frustrations would have to be expressed in our every other week meetings over a 2-3 minute period. That's
Dr.
one
Kumar,
idea. Yep,
Could I just expand on that one quick second
sure.
before you move to your next point? The other thing that could come out of that is to provide context overall context and also the broader, the broader information around the entire district. So not just the one school. So you may get a school that is really upset about their windows or upset about their playground or something like that, and they come and you get 50 people, but then they don't have the broader context of all the other schools. And so I think that when you have the deeper committee structure like that around a topic like that, you're able to provide greater context and depth into, so that parents at least understand.
Yeah, because again, I agree with you, and again, it's pushing towards how do we use this engagement to be problem solving rather than just problem identifying. That's for me the high value. And then the second piece is I'd be much more willing and interested than having these 2 hours of 2-minute, 2.5-minute conversations. I know there are other public bodies who have a hour limit to how much public comment happens before or afterwards. And then, if we did something like that, when else would we meet? Are there other times that we could be available to having comment that are not necessarily aligned with our business meeting? So for example, by the time we came to the superintendent's evaluation last time, we're dead. We're dead on our feet. And there is one of our most important responsibilities we're taking on at 10:30 on a Wednesday night by Zoom. And, I think we did a credible job, given the fact that it was so late at night. I think we may be more engaged and more productive if we had had a longer time earlier in the day. And I know that I will quickly gain a reputation for someone who doesn't want public comment, doesn't want to engage the public on tough issues, and I'm willing to take that heat. I don't share that interpretation. I want deeply effective community engagement. I don't think the structures we currently have reach that standard.
Thank you. Ms. LaPera?
Thank you, Chairwoman Robinson. So I'll first preface by stating that I acknowledge that I am newer to this body, and so I have sat through less meetings and public comment periods. So completely aware of that. Although I have been an observer on the other end, and I have stuck around with you many long hours as well. I think the way I think about public comment is if a family, a student, an educator is also taking the time to sit through a meeting to be able to get their 2 minutes of time, it is something incredibly important that they feel they need to express. And so I do think that our meetings can be long, and we can't deny that impacts our energy and our ability to really do the work. However, I also think that we need to find a way to hear our community loud and clear, because I think when folks come to public comment, in many ways, it's the last resort. That's how I used it as a family member in the system. Like, this is a last resort. I'm crying for help. I need someone to listen to me. And I've hit so many different walls. And so here I am publicly telling you what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling, and how I need your help to address it. I am wondering if there is, and I had an opportunity to connect with 1 or 2 school committee members prior to engaging in this conversation, but I'm wondering if there is a way for us to be more intentional about how we engage with the public comment period, meaning we don't respond to folks because if it's not on the agenda, then it's not on the agenda. But I also wonder how much the public understands that, right? Like, what is the educating that needs to happen for folks to truly understand where they can be, where and how they can be most effective, and where and how we can be most responsive in the moment. So what I appreciate about us thinking about our reports and topics for consideration is that can also give the public an opportunity to prepare and to know what to expect. so that they can proactively engage. I wonder if there is an opportunity for us to hear from folks from the community to also dictate what are some perspective or potential agenda items for us to take up in consideration at a following meeting. Is there a world in which out of 2 meetings that we have a month, one meeting has a potentially capped open comment period and the other one doesn't, right? Like, what is the balance that we can look for? But being a parent and having utilized that as a tool, as what I felt like a last resort, I'm weary of us really limiting it. And also as a former community organizer who used to have youth who would come and present at school committee, I'm hesitant to really think about limiting it. I want to find a solution, but I do think that folks see it as a last resort and a cry for help, and it shouldn't be that way. But that's where we are.
Thank you, Ms. LaPera. Ms. Polanco Garcia, would you like to speak to this issue?
Yes, definitely yes. Cuando yo recuerdo que yo fui una de las madres que siempre iba a presentar testimonio ante el comité.
I remember I was one of the mothers that would always go to the school committee to testify.
Y yo quiero decirles que yo contaba los días para poder verlos a ustedes, los que estaban en ese momento en el comité.
I want to tell you that I would count the days that I had left to be able to attend the school committee meeting and be able to see you all and speak to you.
Y yo me preguntaba, ¿por qué no me responden? Se quedan mirándome y no dicen nada.
And I would say, how come I'm talking and they don't respond? They just look at me and don't say anything about what I'm saying.
Algunos de los miembros asentaban con la cabeza, otros ponían la mano, y yo sentía como mamá y con mi preocupación, ¿estará llegando mi queja realmente al comité?
So some of the members would nod or move their heads. Some would, like move their hands. And I would always be questioning, are they really listening to what I'm trying to convey? How are they going to resolve what I'm asking them to do or to help me with?
Yo pienso que nosotros queremos saber de las 125 escuelas que tenemos, nosotros queremos saber de los estudiantes, de los maestros, ¿verdad? De las comunidades.
I think that we want to know what's going on with 125 schools, their students, their staff. The community wants to know.
Para mí, las reuniones del comité, las reuniones del comité es una oportunidad de evaluar cómo está el trabajo, qué está pasando en las escuelas. Es la única oportunidad donde públicamente nosotros podemos escuchar. Es una evaluación.
I feel that this is the opportunity that, in fact, the only opportunity that we have from the public to come and evaluate our work and tell us what's going on and how we're doing our work, our job.
Entonces pienso que debemos continuar abiertamente escuchando, ¿verdad? Que es el objetivo, escuchando a las comunidades, escuchando a las familias y a los estudiantes.
So my belief is that we need to continue listening, being open to what we have to listen to, the students, the staff, the community. This is the channel to do it.
pero sí pienso que debemos dar el seguimiento a esas personas que se presentan, que testifican. ¿Qué pasó? ¿Cuál fue el seguimiento? Sé que me consta que la superintendente muchas veces ha dicho a su personal que han llamado a personas que han testificado.
So I think it is very, very important that we follow up on what the people are asking during the school committee, the people that are testifying. I think that it's important to do that. I know that the superintendent at times has said, one of the personnel will follow up on your question or on your need.
Sé que ha hecho los esfuerzos, pero pienso que debemos insistir más en el seguimiento, Y es más, yo me atrevo a decir que como miembro del comité, debemos ir a las escuelas, preguntar a las escuelas, presentarnos con el debido respeto, pero pienso que nosotros como miembros del comité, dar una respuesta oportuna en el momento, porque eso va a hacer que el público, las familias piensen en que tienen un comité escolar, unas autoridades que están pendientes y contestan las preguntas y las inquietudes.
So I think that we need to convey our efforts by insisting, that we will follow up and letting them know we will follow up on every question, every concern that is brought up to the school committee. In fact, I think that we should develop a plan to attend all the schools and see how we introduce ourselves as members of the school committee and have an opportunity to respond, answer concerns, questions that the school may have, the community may have. And so the families will learn to trust that, we are here for you and we're ready to, support you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very helpful suggestions. Thank you. Mr. De Araujo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First I'll come out and say, I think what everyone has said, but I'll say in my own words that it's very counterproductive to have these kind of unwieldy 5, 6, 7 hour long meetings. I've never seen that before. I was chair of the Boston Housing Authority Monitoring Committee over 10 years ago. We set limits. We had meetings at different times of day, to engage families that, some families can't come in an evening, but they can do a lunch hour, they can do a morning. I think that's something we should consider. I know everyone, we're all part-time, we have our full-time jobs and so forth. I though would rather have more focused meetings and kind of maybe building off what Dr. Coleman said and what Lorena said as well. How do we channel the public comment into basically the best platform for folks? So for example, our reports, almost no one uses the public comment for a report. And I think the rules state that if someone makes a comment during a report, we can actually engage by the rules. It's on the agenda. They're making a comment. We can engage in the policy point. We don't have to say, Ms. So-and-so, thank you for that. Let me respond or have a back and forth. Although if it's our choice if we want to do that, I think. Whereas with the general public comment, we for parliamentary reasons and open public meeting reasons, we can't engage in the same way. One helpful solution that I saw from a school committee in Florida was that they definitely had limits on all of their comment periods, but they created special periods for specific purposes. So for example, they had a monthly 30-minute open public comment for anyone that wanted to sign up. So an oral comment, and if you couldn't make it, then you would submit written that could actually shape the agenda. So people could say, I want to see a report, in October on, this issue or whatever issue. And you can imagine, and you might have look at the issues that we've dealt with in the past several months, EMK, Mission Hill School, all those different issues. You might have folks that are using, using this public platform as Ms. LaPera says, like, last resort, and Ms. Paloma Garcia said, as, hey, this is where we really get to engage, with the policymakers, with the public figures. We could channel that, we can direct it. That those could be meetings, for example, that don't necessarily have to have a quorum. We can look into that. You might have 2 or 3 board members and appropriate staff at those meetings to bring back to everyone to say, just use EMK. EMK was a hot issue. I think we should have it. We should have the superintendent and staff address it. And it's in our discretion as to what what can be on the agenda. I do think the other pieces, so not just public comment, but the other pieces, which I think we'll go into more detail in a moment, there are areas really there where I think we can really become much more effective and efficient. Madam Chair, just at the top of the discussion, and respectfully, I say this, with the staff, that if we need to organize this so that we as members can get these materials with great anticipation. I'll just give myself an example. I work more than a full-time job and family responsibilities. I might not get to a presentation that's sent to me, even if it's sent to me like on a Saturday or a Sunday. I might not get to that before the meeting. If I do, I have to use my lunch hour or a break. I do my best to try to engage, but it just depends on what's happening. And so it basically leaves me in a meeting where I don't know what's being talked about, or I haven't engaged in a way that I can actually ask intelligent questions. Am I engaging, what we all do? Talk to our, families, advisors, experts, do our own diligence and our own homework. And that's something that that we can't do if we don't get the information in a timely way. And I think, and I'd be happy, I'd love to hear from the staff too, that once we, and I've been on the staff side of serving a board and being counsel for a board, where once we got a good calendar in place, it actually relieved the staff of significant burden, because we all knew October, we're doing this audit report, and we were ready for it. And there were some items that would be tacked on, but it wasn't like that feeling in your gut every single meeting. It's like, what's going to be on it? What's going to blow up? What's going to happen? And let's scramble to respond to it. It was a very clear picture that has to be modified and is influenced by all the issues we talked about in the earlier discussion. But I think when we have that in place, and we look towards other school committees that are functioning and have kind of managed this process really well, I think it'll be a big relief to staff, and then it'll help us. It'll enhance our ability to do the job. So I definitely add my voice to more effectively channeling public comment and preserving all those elements, but making sure that folks find the right platform to get their issues addressed.
Thank you. Ms. Mercer? Ms. Mercer? Oh, there you are. Thank you.
Sorry, I just came back. Can you repeat the question, please?
No, we're talking, you had your hand raised.
Oh, it was? Oh, no, it wasn't raised.
Oh, okay, sorry. No, that's why I was calling on you. Mr. O'Neill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple of quick comments about public comment. And I did express earlier, my viewpoint is, this is how we learn, and it does very much inform. It is one of the ways that we learn, right? We are out visiting schools, we're talking with parents, we're talking with community members. Feedback at committee members at committee meetings is very helpful to me. And I do pay very close attention when people speak. The phenomenon of the meetings running longer is a phenomenon of being in a Zoom environment, because people now are able to sign into a meeting from home and listen and communicate. And it is what our peers at school boards across the country are facing. So we may be surprised by a meeting that goes to 10 or 11 at night. Well, Miami had literally, I believe it was 21 hours of public comment at a meeting before a topic that they were doing, I believe, about reopening schools. I'll repeat that, 21 hours of public comment. And so this is what is happening. Boards are seeing much more input because of the Zoom environment. And quite frankly, I think we should be happy about that. It means the public is engaged. But that does come with risk. And Ms. Polenko Garcia, I think you really point out for us of the perception, right? We feel we're listening and we're hearing, and yet if we're sitting there stoically because of every school committee in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts does not reply to public comment, we cannot, it is not a back and forth exchange. And as much as we say it, or Ms. Sullivan says it at the beginning of every school committee meeting, or at the beginning of every public comment period, I don't think folks hear that and understand that. And so how do we tackle the challenge of preserving public comment and certainly being very sensitive to any perception that we are trying to stop it or stifle it, which is, I don't think is the intent at all. But how can we channel it in a way that is productive for parents and students and teachers that are taking the time to give us feedback, and that they feel they are being heard and that we can also use it. And so a couple of ideas would be maybe, we did this during the exam school issue. We added one session specially just for public comment. And it was a multi-hour session, but it was just for folks to be heard and to give us feedback while we were still formulating the policy. And so people appreciated being able to weigh in versus weighing in 5 minutes before a vote is held. Another way to do it is to encourage members or multiple members to hold open hours. And you can do it by Zoom, where a couple of, you announce that you can have, the virtual cup of coffee or cup of tea in my case with a school committee member or two school committee members to talk about the schools in East Boston, or talk about feeder patterns, or you pick a topic. And it allows people to have, when we go to community group meetings, people love the ability to interact with school committee members and ask a question and get feedback and say, oh, I didn't understand that. Oh, okay, now I see how that's happening. And so doing that maybe would allow a number of us to have more exchanges that people, again, feel heard and can see how their input actually is valued. Lastly, I do encourage us, as I said before, when, we're talking about the structure of our meetings of committee of a whole versus the consent calendar approach. This policy that is in front of us, this current policy in 2012, sorry to be a bit of a school committee historian here, but I will be. This was under Reverend Gregory Groover when he was chair of the school committee. And at that time, public comment was held at the end of the meeting. And we were receiving feedback that people felt they didn't have an opportunity to give feedback before a vote was held. And so, and they were also frustrated that, they would sign up to speak and they didn't know they may be speaking at 9 at night or 10 at night, and they wanted a time certain that they could speak. Reverend Gruber asked several members of the committee to step aside in a small subgroup, go out and do some research and come back to the committee as a whole with a recommended policy. And what you see in front of us is part of it. The rest of it, by the way, is what Ms. Sullivan reads out when she asks people to consolidate remarks if you're a large group, that she reminds people the school committee does not give feedback or answer questions, but uses it to inform. And so I say that because the concerns then were the concerns now, that the school committee is looking to limit public comment. And I don't think that's what we're trying to do at all, but we have to be concerned that people would have that perception. Last week's public comment, someone specifically mentioned that, you'll recall. A parent mentioned concern that we were looking to limit public comment, and that's not what we're trying to do. So Madam Chair, I would respectfully suggest that you ask several members to
Mhm.
go back and look at some best practices. Mr. D'Arrujo mentioned something that is done in Florida.
Mhm.
You know, I'm aware of some different ways that other boards have handled this that increases the way that families and students and community members feel heard, allows us to gather that input to inform our decision-making, yet also allows us to have orderly meetings. And maybe it is a session the day before, strictly for public
Right.
comment, or
Mhm.
in the off week. Maybe it is, you know, virtual coffee with school committee members. There's a number of ways we could do it. But I'd encourage us to form a small group, go out, look at best practices, and then bring this back up with us in
Yeah.
due order.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. I agree with that wholeheartedly and would like to entertain the development of such a group. Is anybody interested in participating in that? I know I would join anyone in engaging in doing some of that research.
And
Mr.
are we
D'Arrujo?
allowed to also volunteer members or ask members if they're interested? Ms. Polenka Garcia, I'm looking directly at you.
Yeah, and I think we have to be careful. We only can be three, no more than three, so that we're not out of
I'm just
public
thinking
comment.
of the input.
Yes, but
you
I
know,
think, yeah,
of
absolutely.
how value of the perception that you had.
Yes.
That you specifically referenced. So.
What is your time frame on this working group or
Yes.
Ms. Robinson? And then
Yes,
also you had
yeah.
another one that you proposed earlier. And I know that Mr. D'Arrujo said he would be interested in that one. So I'm not sure if you want to just take a listing of the ones and then at the end of the meeting, ask for volunteers for the different categories that you have for
Yes.
extending this meeting to find out more information.
Right. I think, yeah, because I think I hope that we can have these small groups meet and be able to bring us back by the end of December some recommendations. So as we look to the new year, we can begin to figure out implementation. So yes, that's a good idea. So far we've got two, this one, and now I'm blanking on what the other topic was.
Standing committees and task
Standing
forces.
committees, right. Okay, so we have those two things that for next steps, you can just put those in the parking lot. We'll come back to those at the end of meeting. So people think if you would be willing, again, we can't have more than 3 people on any committee. So even if it's just a pair, that would be great to be able to get some more input into these thoughts, ideas. Wanted to go back up to the top and talk a little bit about superintendent's report. Superintendent, can you talk a little bit about what you see as being the main focus of that report? And I know that we were trying to saddle you with any other number of updates, but to be realistic, what is the balance of what you feel should happen within the superintendent's report? And given what you've heard today, other things that you might be able to consider on some kind of scheduled monthly or quarterly way that you would also incorporate those ideas into things which would not necessarily need to be a full report or presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Robinson. I was thinking, you know, that one, I think my superintendent's report goes too long. I think that the pandemic has provided a lot of information that I need to share. And so the reports tend to go a lot longer. I also, when Ms. Oliver Davila was the chair, committed to trying to bring more data around student outcomes in my reports. And so that's when I kind of switched to this pictures, you know, and showing more of, you know, some of the going ons around the district, as well as some of the data charts that I've been adding. So I'd like to trim them down to no more than 30 minutes. I'd like feedback on that, of course, from the school committee and the kinds of things you would like to see. But when we had those 5 key goals, that we put together in February, I was trying to put my report around those goals, and taking one per month and then showing the data and giving a lot more context and
Okay.
depth in each of those goals. And so I'd like to return back to that if that's something that's interesting to the school committee, to kind of frame our work, and then have a smaller section on highlights and updates. So I'd be open to any kind of feedback that you have.
Okay. Members' feedback?
I'm very excited by the idea of really focusing on the data and proximate data. What are the leading indicators? What's moving forward? And so that we really can stay focused on those issues and really use that as part of the superintendent's report, and not be as descriptive of all the work that's being done, which is important. It'd be nice if you wrote a longer report that we got sent and read and was available to the public. That would be interesting, but that our time together gives us a chance to look at the data and really focus in on whether it's meeting our expectations or not.
Thank you. Mr. De Araujo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I actually totally agree with Dr. Coleman. I'd almost prefer like a dashboard type format. And also to be able to, I mentioned this, I think earlier in the meeting, or maybe earlier in this session, this part of the session, but is it possible, Superintendent, to get this report, some days in advance? I know we do get your memo, and there's some overlap in the topics and the data. We get your weekly memo, which is very, very helpful. Because sometimes it's very critical, the issues that you bring up in the report. And I feel like, just for myself, I feel like I'm very reactive. I don't even know what you're going to say, right? Because I'm guessing, right? Given what's going on. And what my expectations are and so forth. So is it possible to get that in advance, and agree with having a much more like a decision points focus, like what do we need in the meeting? And that's my same feedback on all the other reports, that some of them I think we just have, like I've read, to the extent that I get it in advance, I'll read it, and you can put 9/10 of the slides in the appendix, and then just give us, what do you want us to focus on or comment on in the meeting? If we get it in advance, we'll prepare our comments on a particular policy or a particular report, and I think that in and of itself will substantially reduce the amount of time that we spend on the kind of the staff work of the presentation, and then increase our time to the extent that we want of our work in actually wrestling with the decision points for that particular report or that particular issue.
Are the Monday memos, the confidential Monday memos, are fairly thorough? And, I put a lot of information and data in those. And so then on my school committee reports, I sometimes will summarize some of that for the public, and condense out what I've shared in the confidential memos on the Mondays. So I'm not certain if that's useful to continue to do, or how that would relate with what I present on the Wednesdays for my superintendent report.
I feel that if you've raised, but those memos become public?
No, they're confidential memos to school committee members.
Okay. Then I think, if we could have, I don't know if it's confidential just because of, I know there's some of those personnel issues and CBA issues and those pieces that have to stay, but the data pieces that you are able to present, that I think would be helpful to make that part of it, get in advance and make that part of it public. I know it's always great to have it, hey, as of Wednesday, like what's the, as of Monday, what's the, COVID testing, or what's, these pieces. It's great to have that as timely as possible. But I think to the extent that whatever can be made public should be made public. But maybe that's not the forum to make that public, unless you want us to engage with it, or we want to engage with it.
Ms. Costello?
So I just wanted to lift up a couple of things that I heard earlier with you and the superintendent that I thought might be helpful for the whole group here. One, we do have a lot of regular updates or annual updates that we have to provide. So that's one place that we can think about cutting reports later and potentially adding a briefer summary, right, in the superintendent's report, or vice versa. So that's another way that I've heard the superintendent's report discussed, and also heard earlier today about how these reports are, yes, of course, for the school committee members, but also for the public. So school committee members, might be more knowledgeable about a topic or an issue, and so they might be okay with a more consolidated version of a presentation, but keeping in mind that the public might need more historical context or information about a policy or decision that's being made. I think the question that Mr. De Araujo brought up is a valid one, though, is like what could potentially go in the appendix. So I just wanted to provide that context for the members of things that we've discussed.
Can I ask Ms. Costello on that? So that part of the presentation is to also is that educational component to the public, that each presentation you're imagining, like if you're thinking I'm putting together this presentation, I want to make sure that whoever's watching this, with or without context, can engage in it. Is that like what you're thinking of that? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important because not everybody tunes in every single time, or people might not know the history, and try to keep that as brief as possible, obviously. But I think that is important context to provide for folks. How we do that could certainly be in different ways.
Concise. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Tran has his hand up.
Yeah, I was looking for it. Mr. Tran, go ahead.
Hi, yes, it's just a comment to Dr. Casillas. I really appreciate and applaud your Monday confidential memo to the members. Those memos do provide me with a clearer understanding of what I expect for the next meeting, for the next committee meeting. And when I compare those confidential memos with the report that you provide to the public, I appreciate that. I think that is that is a very excellent way of keeping us in the loop operationally, even though we don't need it, but I do appreciate that. So it's just a comment. I would encourage you to continue on doing that until you feel that it's too much on your plate, and then we'll take another look. But right now, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rivera?
No, I don't have anything to add. Thank you,
Oh,
Chair.
okay, sorry. Just scrolling back and forth. Okay, we have about 15 minutes left. We still have a little bit more about the meeting structure before we get to next steps. So I know we've talked often about the grants and the that part of the meeting, which really often feels just perfunctory that we are voting on the grants. At some point, and again, this goes back to the structure, we had asked that we have a more a larger discussion and review of the grants, the effectiveness of them, what we've been getting, et cetera. So I just want to put that onto the schedule of meeting agendas at some additional point. And then lastly, reports, we've talked a little bit about the length of presentations and the speakers. Basically for each agenda item, particularly the reports, we usually are budgeting an hour per agenda item because that gives us a 20-minute of a presentation and then 40 minutes to allow each member to have at least 5 minutes of, you know, Q&A themselves. So we should be thinking about a number of the things that we talked about tonight about, you know, more focused presentations, you know, an appendix where we can get additional information that doesn't necessarily have to be presented, you know, although we do want to do some, you know, preamble or pre-presentation to make sure the public is up to speed. But are there other thoughts that people have about ways that we could improve or think about the presentations and also the number of speakers? You know, should we have a maximum number of speakers per presentation? You know, how do we get to know the various members of the superintendent's cabinet? You know, how do we want to handle those things again so that they can be the most effective? Any thoughts?
I'll jump in on the grants one.
Okay, thank you.
That's something, I mean, we talked really about a consent agenda, but that's something that I don't know its history. I imagine it was, and we have to remember that at one of the reasons we're an appointed school board is that the Boston School Committee was not only was more political, it was actually was not always handling finances as appropriately as possible. And so I keep wondering whether one of the reasons we approved that is part of the financial controls. And so I'm wondering if there's a different way to do that. So, you know, a lot of the grants, I mean, for me, the important parts about the grants are they being distributed equitably across the district? So, and so when we're, how do they relate to our major goals? And is it equitable? And that seems to me could be a quarterly report. That's the important part for us. The individual grants seem much more operational, programmatic. That you know, I'm you know, some are more interesting or more in my wheelhouse than others. But I wonder if we can just do quarter reports on how much was the total finances and how was it distributed to our schools by levels or tiers, or however we want to do that. And that would be a more useful data for me in terms of oversight than voting on individual votes. So that's my proposal. I'm sure that the superintendent's team can refine that more accurately around how to manage the grants.
Yeah, Dr. Coleman spoke with Mr. Cooter again about that when you brought it up in the last school committee meeting. But I remember you bringing up as well prior to that. And so I reminded him that we were interested in that. So I'm gonna ask him for a proposal on how to do that in a way that would be satisfactory to you and the committee. So I'll have him make some proposals to us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
One other area that when I first came, people wanted more information on as well was fundraising and the equity around fundraising school by school.
Mm-hmm.
So granting and fundraising kind of go hand in hand. And how are we tracking that? And how are we ensuring that there's greater equity across our schools?
Right. And also the other piece of that is evaluation. With all of these grants, are they doing what we are hoping? Thank you. Okay, lastly, want to just go back.
So
to-
Chairman
Okay,
Robinson,
go ahead.
and that the evaluation could probably be an annual report.
Yes.
So if we get the quarterly or every trimester a report on its distribution, because then we can say, okay, hold it, the data is not reflecting our values of equity or our commitment to equity. And then annually we can have it reported in terms of whether it's being effective. And if it's not being effective, then we have to reconsider what we're bringing this money in for to begin with.
I'd like to also offer that this is something that could be presented to a budget standing committee, subcommittee on regular basis as part of governance and oversight. This could be the auditing, the budgetary functions, all of that tied in.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments or thoughts about the reports, length of presentation, speakers? Okay. Before we move on to next steps, any comments, thoughts of anything that we have not raised tonight that people were expecting to or have thought about while we've been speaking that they want to make sure that we weigh in on before we move to the next steps on what we have thought about this evening? Yes, Ms. LaPera.
Thank you, Chair Robinson. I think the last piece related, I know Ms. Costello mentioned the piece around Massachusetts state law around the remote public meetings currently being temporarily into effect. I don't know where we will land with that at the state level, but I do think that we've been able to engage more of a population of students and families that I don't think have historically had the opportunity to engage in our school committee meetings, especially in the testimony piece, in the open public comment portion. And so in the event that we do move back to in-person meetings without the ability to do hybrid, I think it is our responsibility to figure out how to appropriately make ourselves available to our community members with the translation necessary and at times that are conducive to all family participation. So that's just something that's top of mind for me. I've seen a huge improvement with Zoom in family participation in that way. And I want to make sure that we keep it top of mind.
Thank you. Agreed.
Madam Chair, can I just respond to that a little bit?
Sure.
So along those lines, I do anticipate that the state legislature is going to take up a new bill that will address either doing a hybrid or allowing remote, completely. So I think that's important for the committee to know. And I do think one of the silver linings of this pandemic, if we can find any, has been the engagement that we've seen. And so that is absolutely a top priority for the superintendent and the chair to figure out a way for us to add that voice. And I think specifically the translations piece has worked really well over Zoom. So those are all things that we've learned and absolutely want to keep in mind as we're considering what the future of the meetings look like.
Thank you, Ms. Costello.
Any other comments before we move? Oops, Mr. De Araujo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll second Ms. LaPera. I think to the extent that we can obviously use the current law to remain remote and engaging everyone, but understanding that even the public engagement piece has to be authorized by the legislature because of our archaic rules around these things. I did want to raise the issue of our support staff, and which is great, and deeply appreciate Liz and team. And could we consider looking at best practices and so forth to bolster that? And I've seen throughout the everything from the simulations from the exam school piece. Can we tap into a university or something to help us do that? And not, add more responsibilities to the existing staff. Can we look at how we're distilling our, our feedback and our comments in every meeting, the decision points, helping us track that in a different way to kind of create our own kind of, hey, we raise these issues at a particular meeting. How do we ensure that they're followed up on? How are we measuring ourselves, right? How do we evaluate ourselves, and how are we successful? And maybe that might mean adding some permanent staff. Maybe that might mean engaging on a periodic basis, some external help or consultants and so forth, creating some collaborations. But again, this is an area where I think resources well spent to make us more effective for the public, and look at other comparably sized school districts. I don't even know what our budget is as a school committee for our own administrative duties, but look at comparably sized school systems and see what they do, and see, determine what works for us. One of the key takeaways, from the session we had, the training session, was that we really are completely responsible for our rules, how we govern ourselves within the confines of the law, but everything else that we've been talking about here, if we find ourselves banging our head against the wall, it's our wall, right? We built it, and we can modify it. So I just want to put that out there on the staffing and resources piece. So.
Could I speak briefly to what Mr. DeRuggio says? I know that
yes,
Mr. O'Neill and myself, and I can't remember who else was in the conversation, but we were talking about like tools that you all have, like if you had laptops and a software program, I think it's called Board Book or something like that. And the city was going to adopt one, and then we looked at it, and it just wasn't easy to use. But there are really easy tools that school boards and school committees use to manage their meetings, to take notes, to follow up on things, to evaluate yourselves each meeting, to say, did you like the meeting? And you can have that feedback and capture it. I think that there's those types of software tools that you could all have in front of you that could help simplify the way that we do business together as well. And maybe we could get back to reviewing that and looking at that again, Mr. O'Neill.
Yeah. I think that would be very helpful. I mean, I think what I've heard tonight is that, we still have a lot of homework to do. We do have the resources of the Council of Great City Schools, as well as the Mass Association of School Committees, to help us to begin to go back and look at structures, et cetera. Are new ways, or readopting old ways of doing business as the times are changing, and being able to, as Superintendent has said, even begin to be able to utilize some other types of tools to help us to do this work better. So as we look to next steps, we have on the table these two small working groups that we'd like to think about getting some folks to sign up for now, so that we can have some information, before the end of this year that would go forward as recommendations as we move forward. You can see on next steps, we've got a January retreat. To be honest, is that we know that with new mayor and the and term limits of some of our members, that we don't know what the composition of the school committee will be until January. But we wanted to keep moving forward on the work in front of us so that we can move full steam ahead. So if we can do some of this planning work so that we have some recommendations to moving into January, and then at the January retreat to be able to move these forward into next steps, so that we can, plan out fully the rest of the year, get back onto our work with the goals and values, set up a time to have AJ to come back with us to help us to, as we move forward in the new year, look at these structures and moving these things forward. And also, I think, Superintendent, you've been going through an ongoing policy review.
Yes.
Yeah, So wanted to give you a moment to talk a little bit more about what that entails and what you're looking for us to move forward to do with that.
Yeah, so one of the things I've been troubled with since I stepped foot in Boston is as a policy wonk myself, is really clear and easy to access policy book that we can use and hold ourselves accountable to. And I think that Ms. Sullivan was doing some work on that. I'm not sure where it's at right now, but having that indexed and then online for our public to see so that it's very transparent. We have been in a review, and the Chief of Staff has been leading a review and updating of all of our circulars. I think we're really close to being done, but those circulars are tied to policy. And so the circulars are updated, but we need to get our policies updated. And I think that this would be really terrific work with the Opportunity Achievement Gap Office to have them all have a racial bias review done on them as we update them. So that's another thing. If you had a policy standing committee, they would regularly review policy, regularly review the circulars, bring those to the full committee for updating and approval. It's just a really great way to have a good high-performing organization.
Okay. It sounds great. So that brings us back again that we need to go back into creating these two little work groups to go out to get us some thoughts and next steps around the whole issue around our subcommittees / working groups and the issue of the meeting structure. So I know we're at the 9 o'clock hour. I'm hoping that we can get a few people to step up around this and then go to public comment quickly. So does anybody want to volunteer, or do they want to be volunteered to do any of this work?
Chair Robinson, I hesitate to volunteer knowing that my status is unknown. And so I imagine that my colleague is also feeling.
I think,
yeah. So just to state that, interested, yes, but I don't know that, I don't think it makes sense for me to step into one of those volunteer pieces.
Okay.
Rafaela estaba diciendo, ¿me puede escuchar? ¿Sí? ¿Me escuchas? Estaba diciendo que con el estatus, sin saber qué nos va a pasar cuando llegue la nueva alcaldesa, que no me sentía cómoda en ser voluntaria para alguno de estos comités, sabiendo que no sabemos qué es lo que va a pasar con nuestro estatus. Sorry, there was a lag in interpretation, so I figured I would cut out the middle person.
Thank you. Yeah. I respect your comments, Ms. LaPera, and understand what you're saying, but at the same time, I know that for the time that you're here, we certainly want to make sure that your voices are heard and participate. So any recommendations, any thoughts that you have, we still would love to hear them. And I do respect the uncertainty of the path forward. And that's about half of our committee. So I'm not quite sure what we do at this point with regard to getting that information gathered. But I'll talk offline to people individually. So if you have some thoughts of ideas of, ways that you would like to be involved until we know the next steps, it will all be gratefully appreciated. So as we move to, before we move to close out, I need to check to see, Ms. Sullivan, do we have anyone for public comment?
We do. We have one speaker, Mr. John Mudd. And so in the interest of time, Chair Robinson, I would ask that I forego my reading of the rules.
Yes.
Seeing as though Mr. Mudd could recite them perfectly, I'm sure,
Yes.
and just move on to Mr. Mudd's testimony.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mudd.
Did I make it?
Yes.
Good evening.
All right, sorry, I'm clumsy with this. It's an age problem. So first, I would hope that you could add the proficiency and achievement gaps that should be highlighted as among your priorities. I think the superintendent suggested that. It's at the top of her list on her strategic vision. I think it should be on the top of your list. I appreciated next the reference to the status of native language instruction among the priorities. But I think that what's needed is a clear policy from the school committee that states that you support access to native language and the implementation of the flexibility in the Look Act. This is timely now. The district is actively coming to the final selection of an assistant superintendent for the Office of English Learners. Such a policy would reinforce what is in the job description, that there should be access to native language and there should be experience and management skill to lead the system from sheltered English immersion into forms of bilingual education. Third, and probably finally, I think it's an intriguing idea to have a retreat to go in more depth on the academic vision and to include in that retreat discussion of recovery. My understanding of the last school committee meeting is that the deputy for superintendent for academics proposed that there be an organization called Paper Company, the Paper organization, that would provide tutorial support 24/7 to all students in Boston. Obviously, recovery and academic support is a critical issue as we try and overcome what's happened to our students during the COVID-19 year. But I frankly tried to look up and see what is the Paper organization. And what I found in a quick Google search was that it's one of the most successful high-tech organizations that has one of the fastest business growths in North America, Canada, and the US. It received recently $100 million in venture capital financing, so it's clearly profit-making. The question I tried to answer is, what sort of education success has it had? And frankly, I couldn't find evidence. This is a quick search. So my question here would be, what sort of checking has been done on the educational success of this program that is going to provide such a critical element in academic support? And did the selection of Paper go through the racial equity planning tool so that we know that this organization is adapted to the needs of our Latino, Black, special ed, and English learner students? I hear a tinkle of a bell, and I will spare you more, but I think this is something you could review, should be reviewed in the retreat. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mudd. So that concludes our business for this retreat, and the next school committee meeting will take place on Wednesday, October 27th at 5 p.m. If there's nothing further, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. DeArujo,
Yes.
Ms. Lopera,
Yes.
Ms. Polanco Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Tran,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson.
Yes.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you all, and the meeting is adjourned. Good night.
Good night.